You were just in
I,
France last week. Now
I
you're
was
back in the
in
UK.
I was in France last week. Yeah, someone has to do it.
Yes, and of course it's you. So welcome, Andrew. Great to see you again. And today we have one of a very special guest, Dr. Anh Tran. So before we get into welcoming you on, Anh, I just want to just give everyone, the listeners, a bit of a bio around who you are. So you are an emergency physician. You've got 15 years experience as a specialist. You're a director of medical services at in Victoria. So you are from Victoria, where you provide a lot of palliative care services. You've held many leadership roles, and that's where we actually connected, wasn't it? When you're in a leadership role, clinical leadership role, where you know how important it is for strong leadership, good communication skills, and just that high degree, I think, of situational awareness, which is what we often talk about. You also have been a director of training, and you've held many leadership roles in quality and safety. You've also completed your Master of Health Management, and you're currently doing an MBA. You also love to run in your spare time, which I'm actually not sure when that would be, but you've actually completed 5 marathons since taking up running almost 2 years ago. And you've done the Boston Marathon. You also did the Tokyo one as well recently, didn't you?
London was my first
London.
one. That was my bucket list one, never to do another one again. And 3 marathons later, I've done the Tokyo, and I think my next one is well, overseas one is the Honolulu one actually. So
Wow.
that's at the end of the year.
So a slight high achiever.
Slight high achiever, yes, yes. So even though I don't, you know what I say, Kylie. There's, I don't think of myself as a high achiever. It just, yeah.
Everyone else does, though. Everyone else does. I remember you saying to me a long time ago, God, being a doctor is just so easy for me. And I used to think, wow, that is just absolutely inspirational, But, Andrew's a business owner. He's a leader. I'm a business owner. I'm a leader myself. And, Andrew and I would be under pressure all the time, running an organization, running a company, dealing with teams. But when I think about leading under pressure, I often reflect on doctors. I've done a lot of work with doctors. I've done a lot of work with nurses. I've done a lot of work with hospitals. Now, that's true leadership under pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And when we first started talking about this topic, the situation that, particularly with my field of work, that comes to mind is really, the resuscitation situation. I mean, that's performing under high pressure on steroids,
Yeah, yes, yes,
um,
like a bit.
and it's really in reflection. It does have all those elements of leadership in it, but in a very kind of, condensed, high pressure sort of situation, that has its own, like, in terms of leadership, it's almost, there's a special kind of way you need to kind of act as a leader in that situation. But yeah, I could think of nothing more high pressure than having a resuscitation in progress, and having to lead a team of, often 10, 15 people,
In a
sort of
moment.
dealing, yeah, in that moment. Yeah, yeah. So yeah.
So in that moment, right, you're in that moment where you are doing that, and you've got the nurses, you've got the doctors, and you've probably got family around you because you're in an emergency room. How do you kind of stop? Like in business, we go take 10 breaths and we can keep on moving on, right? Or, take some time out. But you don't have that option. What do you need to do? What do you need to do to control yourself first, I think? And then what do you need to do to control the people around you so that everyone is calm?
Yeah, I think that years of practice.
Yeah.
But I really think it's, it starts with you. Your role as a leader in that situation is really to set the tone. And if you're not calm yourself, I've often seen it, I've seen people lead in that situation, they're not calm, and the whole situation is just a mess. It's just everyone's stressed, and times that there can be times when the outcomes aren't kind of what you want it to be, both in terms of for the patient, but also for the team. Like I think that there's when you're in that high pressure situation, the team are also kind of, the victims in that as well. And they're vulnerable as well. And if you don't kind of take care, there can be sort of a post-traumatic, post-traumatic stress like situation that occur, after the event. So, but yeah, how do I deal with the situation? I mean, I think that, first thing I do is actually, I'm aware that I'm triggered. So the first thing is actually awareness and that this is a triggering situation for me, that I'm very stressed, and then I'd automatically go into almost a meditative state where I actually take a deep breath in.
Yeah,
And
right.
also just kind of really subconsciously, and as I said earlier, this is really training, but I almost go into that, monitoring my breath, monitoring the way I talk, monitoring the way I behave, monitoring the way I move, and conduct myself in the situation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's really now a reflex because I know how important it is, and also that I've triggered. This is a way I can deal with my trigger.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's sort of how I do it, so yeah, that's a self-regulation. And sometimes, some little tricks I do is I actually clasp my hand. When I'm going to talk really quickly, or if I'm about to go into fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
I actually sort of hold my hand, clasp my hand, and it stops me from doing this, waving my hand around. And so that's one trick, plus the breathing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Andrew, you've worked with mining companies, so it's a bit of a life death situation there too, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I'm fascinated by this because that's how I started out my coaching career, working with people in high-end compliance, life and limb industries, right? So it wasn't just mining, but it was medical and it was military and stuff like that, right? So leading under pressure, I sort of get it. For some, like I worked with a guy on a mining site, and he said on a good day, if something goes south, goes wrong, somebody might get injured, right? On a good day. On a bad day, somebody dies, right? And it's how do you lead under that situation? And right at the top of this, we talked about situational awareness, right? Particularly in the military, they talk about situational awareness. What's the situation? You've got to set, and you've touched a little bit about that, right? Which is your training and your drill. What's happening? It's just a sense check, right? What's the situation? And I love the thing you're saying. It's the awareness. It starts with the awareness. I'm aware that I'm triggered is like that self-awareness. So I'll give you a quick example of a guy I worked with in the military where they were on a patrol and they were going down this street, and he said there's nothing to suggest that there's nothing wrong about walking down that street, but he said, hang on, I got to stop. So he stops everybody, right? And didn't know why, but he stopped everybody. And so we've got the situational awareness, but there's something telling there's something not right about that street, right? And the thing that how he described it was what you just said is I felt in myself there was something wrong here. I felt triggered. I felt anxious. I wasn't sure why. So the situation isn't giving him a read, right? And then the third element was response awareness. So I'm aware of the situation. I'm aware of how I'm feeling. What's my response to that? So particularly in the military, they talk about that. So he said, everybody pull back. And it turned out there were snipers down the end of this street, and they did an aerial survey and they found that. And the question I said, when you think about what was it that gave it away? He said, there were no chickens. I said, how do you mean? He said, well, normally when we go down this street, there are chickens. There are hens walking around in the street. So obviously the word had gone out. We're gonna shoot some people. If you want your chickens, get them off the street because they're going to be. But he said it wasn't conscious, if you get the idea of it. But he said something triggered it, right? So I'm fascinated by what you're saying. So you go into a resource situation, you're reading the situation clearly, and then you've done that self-awareness bit.
Yeah. I think, and I was just hearing what you were saying about, the example that you gave. And I think, one of the important reasons why you need to be self-aware of the fact that you're triggered and you're potentially in a fight or flight situation is, as we know, when you're in a fight or flight situation, your prefrontal cortex doesn't quite work as well. And you need it to work well. And so you need to de-stress yourself, de-escalate yourself, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for him, he's probably learned to do that. And same with me, like I've learned to, I can't think clearly if I'm triggered by this. So I need to kind of now almost self-protect my brain so that I can think clearly. But yeah, that I think that's what I mean in terms of, realizing that the trigger has happened and that I now have to de-escalate myself.
The thing I like about what you're saying, though, is you've made it conscious, right? And so people have this stuff happen, but they're not conscious of what's happening. So, and you're right about the drilling. They drill for this, right?
Yeah.
So when an emergency team rocks up to a car crash, for example, they know it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
Right. But they've drilled for that. And if they go into overwhelm.
Yeah. To me, what I'm hearing, and I go every time I hear when we have conversations around leadership, to me, I instantly see the qualities or the competencies that we see in leaders. And when I'm hearing you talk, Anne, to me, it's that high level of emotional intelligence. What you're using there is your emotional intelligence is one, that self-awareness, and then that self-management, right? But then you're using those others, that social awareness and that relationship management part of emotional intelligence as well. And, one of the things that many leaders do when they're under pressure, whether it be in your situation or whether it just be in general, something's gone wrong, instantly they respond, say something the wrong way, get cranky, do something stupid, right? And then later regret that or realize they should have just slept on it or not had that meeting straight away. But what really, and even what I'm hearing Andrew say too, is you guys are trained to not react like that. You're trained to stop and go, what's going on with me now? How do I manage that? And then how do I manage around it? Like, more people need that.
It's a bad day at the office if you roll through that stop sign, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And, I was going to make a point that, we're talking about the resusc situation, these emergency situations, but, you sort of take a few steps back and it's not that situation, but it's still a high pressure situation where you have to deliver on sales, deliver on time, deliver on performance, right? And too often I've seen leaders where that pressure gets the better of them, they go into fight or flight mode. They don't think rationally. They start, and they don't think about their team. So I think the next point I sort of was going to make was actually my next step is, what do I need to manage the situation? What do I need to manage the team? And they don't do that. They kind of, they haven't put their life jacket on. They haven't kind of quite understood what they're doing. And so it leads to these kind of, the communication problems, the task allocation problems, the high expectations of the team, and then, not managing the team, and then the well-being of the team, and all those things, and those things are so important, right? I mean, the research says that leaders who don't lead effectively in those situations, the teams don't do well. So
yeah.
This is a really, really interesting one. And it's slightly off to tangent, but I love the bit about I've got a situation. Can I lead the situation? Can I lead myself? Can I lead my team? Which is Kylie talks a lot about that, right? I was working with a group recently where the guy is under a lot of pressure, and he's not under the pressure of a life and death situation, but there's big chips at the table. It's a very expensive situation he's dealing with, right? And the reason I got involved was because the turnover of top talent in that team was very, very high, right? So if you think about, you've got A players and B players. So the B players stay, right? And the A players leave, right? And so it's either something wrong with the situation, or it's something wrong with the leader, or it's something wrong with the team, or there could be other factors. So you're sort of trying to narrow down the variables. What's happening here? And the thing that I noticed with this guy was the way that he spoke to his team was very parenty, right?
Yes.
So when he got put under pressure, it's like your mum's come into the room, or your dad, or your dad. It's suddenly he treated them like children. That was
Well,
his
when you're under
response.
pressure, you revert back to your kind of, primitive, your primitive, personality type, right? So I
That
imagine he'd be a
control.
sort of a driver type personality, very controlling. And so, and I've seen that situation. And I think one of the things that made me aware of the need to self-regulate is I've actually watched others lead in that situation. And
Yeah.
when leaders get stressed in that situation, you can see it, that you can see that they're not handling the situation because they start talking really fast,
Yeah.
the voice goes really loud, they start rapid fire giving instructions, that completely, it's like a machine gun goes off and the whole team has to catch the bullets, right? And they can't. So everyone's kind of scrambling around and they're becoming ineffective, and
Yeah.
it becomes a very discoordinated mess. And I see that both in the research situation, but also see that in the project situation where things start kind of falling off, and then that everyone starts panicking, the leader starts panicking, and they go into that situation. So yeah.
Take a situation on where you go, okay, this was the situation we had. Do you ever then stop with your team and go back and debrief? Here's what happened. Let's talk that through.
Yeah, not enough, not enough. But I do think it's really important. I mean, part of the leading under high pressure is really around the after, leading the aftermath. And it's about kind of, the reflection part, the continuous improvement. What did we do well? What didn't we do? And guaranteed, everyone will always go to what didn't we do well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's what did we do well, and I think just kind of celebrating, and the fact that it was a really tough situation. We either got the outcome or we didn't get the outcome,
Yeah.
but we actually performed well in this kind of
Yeah.
situation. And if we didn't perform well, what didn't we do? What could we have done better?
Yeah.
I don't think we do it nearly enough. I mean, certainly in healthcare, we're getting better at it, but I think we tend to kind of move on. Certainly in the emergency situation, there's always another one coming, so you're
Yeah.
kind of onto the next situation. But but I think it's so important to prevent that post-traumatic stress, if you like. I'm going to call it that, but it's not, but it is. I think it is. There is an element
Can
of that.
be, can it? Yeah.
Yeah, there is an element of that. And I think if you don't do it, you don't improve for the future, but you also, the team goes away with baggage.
Yeah.
And
And the burnout.
they're learning from you as a that bad leader as well.
For sure.
Yeah. There's the continuous improvement for yourself. I think there's the continuous improvement for the team, but also the continuous improvement for yourself. And I think that's just as important.
I agree with you, mate. I learned to lead by being under so many bad leaders. So I learned what not to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we all did. We have.
Yeah, exactly. I love the bit about the self-regulation, because it's almost comes down to there's a situation, like you're saying, I've got to lead the situation, but it seems to me you're really saying, when you use words like self-regulation, you're leading yourself first.
Yeah, I agree. So I think for me, the three pillars is lead yourself, lead the
Yeah.
situation, and lead the team.
Yeah.
They're the three pillars that I work on. And
I
the
love that.
situation, I think if you've got a good team, right, and you have it because they're there with you, right? You've hired them. You have to trust and have confidence that they will do it, but you just need to empower them to be able to do it when they're triggered. And that's the key, you know, and they may not know how to self-regulate as a team, but also as individuals within that team. And your role is, as the leader in that, is not to actually get in the weeds, it's actually to empower that team to be able to do what they can do.
One of the things I often ask my clients is whatever the situation is, call it X, right? But it's a stressful situation because we're leading under pressure. My question is, how are you being around that situation? Which I'm trying to get into. How are you being around that situation, right? That's what I'm trying to get them conscious of. How are you being under pressure?
Yeah. I think that it's that calm. You know, I think, I don't ask that question enough in the reflection. We often talk about our, you know, the technical stuff. We talk about the team stuff, but we actually don't talk about how do you feel and how do you, you know, how are you conducting yourself? So I think that that's a really good point. But I think, you know, certainly I've done that myself. I've kind of gone, in the past, this is what I used to do. This is what I was. And that was not very helpful. You know, that wasn't helpful for me. It wasn't helpful for the team or the situation. Yeah.
The example I gave was I was working with a guy who's owed 83,000, right, from clients. If you know how you sometimes people don't pay their bills, right? So people out there will know what that's like sometimes. But the question was, he wanted to get into the narrative about why, you know, how life's bad and customers are bad and all that. I said, yeah, but how are you being around this situation? And how he's been around is very victimy, very life's not fair, blah, blah, blah. And when we really dug into it, what he was tapping into was he goes to a place where he feels shame and fear. And that's his trigger point. Like it's almost like using your words, he knows he's triggered when he starts to feel this shame. So the next question I said was, how do you need to be around this situation going forward? Right. But trying to make it conscious. Yeah. I love what you're saying, because I mean everything you're saying is along that line. You know, lead yourself, lead the situation, lead my team. But you've got to do that really. You're almost saying the circuit breaker is I grab my hand.
Yeah.
It's a real grounding sort of stop point, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, and somehow it makes me kind of really grounded, you know, and you have to be grounded in that situation, I think. Well, in any situation under high pressure, you just have, I don't know, there's probably a physiological response in the body that sort of does that. But you know, I find that's a very grounding thing. And my voice, you know, I've watched myself in a simulation, and people who've watched me, I didn't notice this myself until I actually was in a simulation that was filmed. And people went, wow, you were just so calm, you know, and I was like, yeah, I am quite calm. I'm not calm on the inside, but I'm calm, you know, in how I conduct myself. And that's so important, you know, it's about how you project yourself. So yeah.
Yeah, which again, you know, if we think about emotional intelligence, what you're talking about is that emotional intelligence. But the point about emotional intelligence is emotions are just triggers, right? It's our intelligence is what we do with that, right? So it's one, getting to understand that trigger and then being intelligent enough to know how to do it. What to do with that. Do I remain calm? Do I need to apply logic and reasoning here? Do I need to, you know, self-manage my responses, whatever it might be? It's using those fundamental emotional intelligence quadrants and applying that in your own situation. I think also, besides emotional intelligence, one quality I think every leader needs to have, and I know I wrote about this in a book that Andrew and I co-authored around when we had COVID, was around what do people need from leaders during this time? And I touched on calmness. I think teams need people to remain calm when they're not. And that's what you're saying is when I'm looking at myself, I'm going, wow, I'm pretty calm in this situation. Even though I'm not on the inside, you're projecting that. And our team need us to remain calm.
Yeah, so important. And because, you know, calm instills confidence.
Yeah.
That you've got it, you know, you're not fazed by it. You're confident about the situation. And then the team's confident. You know, if you're projecting yourself as not being very confident, you're
Don't know what I'm
scattered,
doing. Yeah.
you're flaking out, or you're panicking. It means there's something wrong. This guy
Yeah.
doesn't know what to do. You know,
Yes. Yes.
the ship's sinking.
Yes. Yes.
And
And should
everyone
I be
starts
worried?
going, yeah, everyone starts becoming, it's sort of that they lose confidence. And so,
Yeah.
so I think that is really, really the reason you need to keep calm, I guess, in terms of projecting yourself as being calm. But I think from a self perspective, I think it's really that kind of the ability to think rationally.
I'll
It's
ask you.
almost like
Oh,
you're slowing
sorry.
time
Oh.
down too, aren't you? When you take that pit stop, it's like you're slowing time down. Even it could be just seconds, but you slow time down.
I do, actually. I do. I do it subconsciously, but it's almost like, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's almost like in my mind, I kind of put the kind of, a slow time, the motion, because, when you're in that situation, when you're not, it's almost like the fight or flight, because fight or flight makes you go faster, right? And when you're going faster, you're not situationally aware. You're not really kind of thinking, okay, my next step. What's my next step, right? And so almost slowing things down when things are going hyperspeed anyway is sort of helping that situation for both you and the team. I've certainly, as an example, in a resuscitation situation, often I'll see leaders who will, give medication orders. So the role of the team leader is just to give medication orders, and they'll often do it. They'll think about it in their mind, and they'll just say anything that comes out of their mind. Give this, give this, give this, give this, give this. But they won't kind of realize that actually a nurse can't, or person can't give this drug unless they've actually drawn it up. And they can't give the next drug unless they've actually given the first drug. So telling that person to do the next task when they haven't completed the last task is pointless. And it actually further exacerbates that fight or flight response for that person, the team member who's already triggered. So you're further triggering that person. And then you're triggering another person who then has to go and do that other job, and then you've got this situation where the roles aren't very clear. So, and it's that, I cite that example in a resus, but it also happens in projects.
Of
So
course.
it's-
Yeah, I was going to say, absolutely.
In offices, in sales,
yeah.
it's like, when people become panicky, they do that. They kind of rapid fire. It's like the machine gun analogy. They fire off the machine gun. Everyone has to catch the bullets, but only one person or three people can only catch, three bullets, and the rest kind of drop. So, so kind of, I think that's the reason for the slowing.
I'm also getting from you, but I mean, it's really, you've mentioned it 3 times now about the impact and the knock-on effect on your team. What do your team learn from these situations? Because it sounds like you're really concerned about their levels of stress as well.
Yeah,
so when you adjust, their levels of stress also de-escalate as well.
Yeah, I think it's about prevention. Like I think it's about minimizing that stress. I mean, it's a stressful situation so you can't take that. It's a high pressure situation. It's going to cause stress. It's about minimizing that stress to a point where you can perform. There's a fine line between stress for performance and stress that becomes, disabling. And it's just keep getting it to that right tighter, that point where there is enough stress for people to kind of perform, but not decompensate. And I think the decompensation bit is I've seen situations where we've had just a really horrible resuscitation, or pressure situation where it's not managed very well. People come out and it's just it's like your head's in a spaghetti, like your head's in spaghetti loops, and there's no time. It's really difficult to unravel all that.
Yes.
And I think that prevention of that is really key. because then it reduces the debriefing that occurs afterwards. Or not reduces the debriefing, sorry, it reduces the amount of work in debriefing that is required. Yeah.
It's almost like you could have a little checklist or a run through, like we know this is going to be stressful. When you get under pressure, have you got a little circuit breaker? I do this, what's yours,
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's a good thought. I haven't thought of that.
Post-coaching, isn't it? It's post-coaching. And I absolutely agree that, we often talk about what we could do better from a project perspective, from that perspective, but really, I think it's the people that need to maintain their composure first in order to, as you say, react and guide the situation in order to guide the team. So I totally agree. Doing that post-coaching after.
Yeah, Kylie, I mean, you're a big, I know you're a big, and I'm a believer in frameworks, and I think that having that framework of, self, situation, team, for leaders to work through, and then sort of really in the debrief is really just kind of,
how did you go with yourself?
How did you go? And that's yourself. Yeah,
situation.
exactly. Your team. And getting that team, having that conviction to have the team feedback on you. How did you perform in that situation? What could you have done better? Oh, well, look, you gave us 10 different tasks. We were unable to achieve it. You wanted it to done in 2 days, and we couldn't do it. And so therefore we dropped, all the balls. And just sort of being aware that as a leader, you play a part in how you manage the people, in the performance, just as much as the team. So, yeah.
This sort of leads to another topic about psychological safety, where people feel safe that they can raise those issues with you in your team.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Because otherwise they won't, they won't. They'll go, no, it was all good. And then they'll walk and go and talk to someone else about it. And I know we've gone over. Thank you so much. It's not my fault, it's Andrew's. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to just hear. I love the framework. Okay. Myself, situation, my team. But I think the qualities that you're talking about is emotional intelligence. You're talking about remaining calm under pressure. You're talking about logic and reasoning, I hear as well. And then there's that self-awareness. And regardless of whether or not you're in an environment like yours, I think all of those qualities can play beautifully in the business environment as well. So I think everyone can take away those core skills that you've developed. And I know you've developed them over time, but look, as business leaders, we have to develop them over time ourselves as well. And Andrew always likes to ask a question at the end of these sessions. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to ask the final question before we release you for the night.
What we've noticed is people we're talking and then we go, and we're finished, right? And then they go, oh, I wish I'd said this. Right? It's the thing I wish I would have said. Is there something that you think I really want to get this across? This is the one thing I came on here. If I don't get this across, I'm going to feel I've missed out. What's the thing you feel I'd love to say this?
I said it all, really. I think, yeah, look, I mean, I think just so important, self-awareness. I think that's just starts with self-awareness before you can jump in and, kind of do really anything else in that high pressure. It's so important.
The thing I like about what you're saying, the thing I took away from today is also you play the bigger game. You're playing a much bigger game than just your self-awareness is in service to something bigger than yourself. That's what I took.
Yeah. Yes.
Be patient to your team, but it's that circuit breaker, that conscious awareness of what's happening is in service to something a lot greater than yourself, which I really appreciated hearing. Yeah. It was really good. Mate, what a pleasure. And thanks for the work you do, mate. I mean, it really is not just game changing, life changing. So there we go.
Oh, no, thank you, Andrew. As I say to Kylie, I sometimes feel like it's not my real job.
No, it's not. It's not your real job, mate. No, running is your real job. Running marathons is your real
Running
job.
marathons around the
my
world.
job.
That's your real job. My real
Yeah,
job
yeah.
is to get some coffee in France, right?
I
Everything I do is so I
love
can do that.
I
Yeah,
know.
it's what a pleasure to meet you. What a real delight.
Likewise, same.
Thanks very much, Anne.
Good
And
to see you, Kylie.
yeah, absolutely great to see you again, as always. And Andrew, as always, a pleasure to spend time with you. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. So have a